And then with that, I'd love to introduce our speaker, although I'm not really going to give her any, she's going to do her own bio. But Sherry, thank you so much for being here. As you know, I'm very excited for this topic. The environment is my thing. And as I think everybody here knows, so I'm thrilled to have you here and to talk about what the state is doing and maybe even talk about some projects that are happening locally. So the floor is yours.
Sure, and have you enabled me to share my screen?
Yes, I have.
All right, let's do it. Okay. All righty, let's see. Put it into slideshow, please. All right. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Sherry Godlewski, and I am with the Department of Environmental Services, and I serve as the Resilience and Adaptation Manager for our agency. So I focus on how we respond to the impacts of climate change more so than the reduction of greenhouse gases. I have a colleague who focuses on that. So I'm going to talk to you about the International Panel on Climate Change's recent report that was just released on August 9th. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more than just that report, and Amanda specifically asked for that report, but I'm also going to insert some changes in New Hampshire that we're seeing in terms of climate impacts. And then I will summarize the report and talk a little bit about what we can do. And we can talk about what we can do as a group as well. And then I am going to provide you with an overview of what is being done in the coastal region. So we have a very good set of activities going on in coastal New Hampshire, more so than other parts of the state. So this is the report. It is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also referred to as the IPCC report, just released last month. To create this report, 234 scientists from around the globe summarized the current climate research on how the Earth is changing and what those changes mean for the future. After the scientists get done doing their work, 195 governments have to sign off line by line on this summary for policymakers so that they are all in agreement with what this report says. And the big take home, the start off take home, is that humans are unequivocally warming the planet. And that warming is triggering rapid changes in our atmosphere, our oceans, our polar regions, and it is increasing this extreme weather that we're seeing around the world. And it's happening at a rate that's unprecedented for at least thousands of years. So that's the big message from this report. And I'm going to go into a lot more details. So the statements that these scientists make are based on scientific understanding, and the key findings are formulated as statements of fact or associated with a level of confidence. And you'll understand that as I go through, I'll point these out. They also separate what are projections versus what are observations. So this report is over 4,000 pages long. You don't have to be intimidated by that because it's very user-friendly online, and you can look at a slide deck that they've created. You can look at regional fact sheets. So there's a lot of ways to get into this document, and you don't need to be afraid of it. In this document, they looked at 5 different emission scenarios. So in the world of climate change, we talk about emission scenarios, and the emission scenarios are how we emit greenhouse gases. So the low end is if we do a lot to reduce our greenhouse gases by reducing our use of fossil fuels, we will have a lower emission scenario. Whereas if we do nothing, we will have a high emission scenario because we're going to keep using fossil fuels, keep putting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So it's a higher amount of emissions. And that's just climate talk, but I want you to understand that they looked at 5 different emission scenarios, and they referenced that in some of their statements. And I also want to say that my slides are text heavy because I wanted you to see the whole statement from this summary for policymakers. I'm going to just pull out the highlights. And Amanda, if you want me to send you this as a PDF so people can have it afterwards, I usually do that after presentations. And so that's also why I have included a lot of text. All right, so let's dive in. So the overview of the IPCC report is that the scientific consensus on climate change is stronger than it's ever been. The science of attribution is stronger than later. And what the science of attribution is that scientists can now link these extreme weather events that we're seeing all around the planet to increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the increased risk to society from these extreme events. So the science of attribution is really new. They just started working on attribution in 2016, and now here we are in 2021, and it's stronger than ever. So we can see that this increase in carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is just fueling these extreme weather events. And in fact, Hurricane Florence was forecasted in 2018 with an attribution statement. So people are very interested in that because that can help us understand how much bigger our storms are when we do the attribution science. The impacts of climate change are worldwide. And there are really no surprises in this report if you've been paying attention. The big take-home message from this report is the need to act now is very urgent. So this is one of the regional fact sheets that I told you there's a number of ways you can access the report. And I'm just going to go through this and show you the points that I was making in one of the first slides. So North and Central America are projected, so this is a projection, to experience climate changes across all regions, with some common and others showing distinct regional patterns that lead to unique combinations. The shifts in North and Central American climate become more prominent with increasing greenhouse gas emissions and global warming. So we're projected to see more changes as we continue to see increases in emissions and global warming. And there's some distinct regional patterns. So the North American patterns are something that we'll talk about a little bit more. Temperature change, both the average and the extreme, has already been observed in most regions and is larger than the global mean. So I'll talk about the global averages, and then you know that it's larger in the northern part of the planet. And it is attributed, here's that attribution statement, to human influence. So we are causing these temperature changes. And under all future scenarios, so remember I said they did 5 emission scenarios. So even if we start reducing fossil fuels today, we are locked into a certain amount of warming. So extreme high temperatures are continued to increase, and that is virtually certain. So there's one of those certainty statements with larger warming in the north. So we're going to warm more than, say, the equator. Relative sea level rise is projected to increase, and that's very high confidence, and is associated with increased flooding and erosion, which we've already seen in observations. Ocean acidification and marine heat waves are projected to increase, both in intensity and in duration. So they're going to last longer and they'll be really intense. And that's virtually certain and high confidence, respectively. We're seeing strong declines in glaciers, permafrost, and snow cover already. And this is going to continue in a warming world. And then the tropical cyclones, so these severe storms, hurricanes, and dust storms are expected to become more extreme. So see how this is broken out in a really nice, easy to digest way. So this is the regional fact sheet for our area. So now let's dive into the report a little bit. So the current state of the climate says that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, the ocean, and the land. And you can see in this graph where they can separate out the greenhouse gas emissions from humans combined with natural, and these would be the natural causes. So this is the temperature. So this is the temperature going up. And you can see how they can pull out the natural causes and attribute it to what humans are doing. So the modeling has gotten so advanced that they can pull apart what is human and what is natural. And that's really helpful for us. And then this is an important statement. Land and oceans have taken up about 56% of the carbon dioxide emitted into our atmosphere per year over the past 6 decades. So CO2 is going up into the atmosphere. It's being absorbed by the ocean. That's what's causing the ocean acidification, and it's being absorbed by all the plants on the planet, right? Because that's what plants do. They take in carbon dioxide to grow, and then they let oxygen out. So we've had this benefit of the oceans and land taking up a lot of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's impacting them both, but it's helping to reduce the amount that's in the atmosphere. And I'll get back to this a little bit later. So the scientific community is more certain than ever that human activity, mainly our use of fossil fuels like oil and gas, is directly responsible for these trends and the things that we're seeing here in the Northeast and in New Hampshire, like extreme rainfalls and diminished snow cover. So the scale of these changes across the climate system is unprecedented over many centuries and many thousands of years. So not only are we seeing changes everywhere, but the scale of those changes is unprecedented. And in 2019, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations were higher than at any time in the last 2 million years, very high confidence here. Methane and nitrous oxides were higher than any time in the last 800,000 years. So now let's look at this graph, and I'm going to break it down for you. So let's picture this is here we are today, and we're looking backwards in time, 400,000 years. They reference 2 million years, but we couldn't fit all that on this graph. So looking back 400,000 years, and so this is time, and then this is the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So the black line is the carbon dioxide, and you'll see that in the past, the carbon dioxide has risen and fallen in a natural pattern as it relates to how the Earth is, how close the Earth is to the sun, et cetera. So there's natural variation in carbon dioxide. But what you notice is for the past 400,000 years and even 2 million years, it hasn't gone above 300 parts per million. See, this is the highest the carbon dioxide concentration has been. Now, here we are at the Industrial Revolution. And after the Industrial Revolution till now, our carbon dioxide concentrations have gone up to 421 parts per million. That just happened on April 3rd of this year. So that's interesting in and of itself. But what's most interesting is you see the strong mirroring between temperature and carbon dioxide. So when the carbon dioxide's high, the temperature's high. When the carbon dioxide is low, the temperature's low. So then you can think forward, and if the carbon dioxide is up this high, something we haven't seen in 2 million years, we're going to see warmer global temperatures. And it's true. The global surface temperature has increased at a faster rate since 1970 than any other 50-year period in the last 2,000 years. So there's a link between carbon dioxide and temperature, because the carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere and it acts like a blanket around the planet. When you put more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it makes the planet warm more. So now let's talk about New Hampshire. And this is my cat, Rudy, and he weighs 16.7 pounds, and he thinks our summers are way too hot. And Rudy's right, because we're seeing an increasing number of days over 90 degrees, but more significantly, nighttime temperatures are increasing at a faster rate. From 1940 to 2017, temperatures in the United States by 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. This reduced nighttime cooling can have serious health effects. Concord had its 4th hottest summer on record with 25 days above 90 degrees in 2020, while Manchester had 32 days, a whole month above 90 degrees. And coupled with that high heat is this crushing humidity. And all indications show that it's not going to change. We're going to move in this warmer than average direction. And this is a great image that shows that when you compare 2000 to 2019 to 1980 to 1999, we have seen a more than doubling in these high, hot, humid heat days. So in this humidity, we're just not used to in the North. We don't do well in it, and I find it very hard. I'm sure you do too. So we're seeing more heat and more humidity. Now let's go back to the report. And the report states that human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe, and their attribution to human influence has strengthened since the last report. So I've already said that a couple of times, but these are images that I think are just incredible. This is last year in September when we had the intense wildfires and the smoke was coming all the way into New Hampshire while we had these hurricanes brewing in the Atlantic. And then this is just from June, that big heat dome that occurred in the Pacific Northwest where they had temperatures over 100 degrees and people were really suffering. So this climate change is already affecting these extreme weather events in every region across the globe. So when we think about the future, it's important to note that global surface temperatures are going to increase until at least mid-century under all emission scenarios. So even if we stopped emitting CO2 today, we're locked in to a certain amount of warming. So we're going to see continued warming until mid-century. And if we do something, there'll be less warming after mid-century. But if we don't, it's going to continue to get warmer. So this global warming of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, which is the goal of the Paris Agreement, is likely to be exceeded in this century unless we do these deep reductions. So we have to deeply reduce our CO2 and our use of fossil fuels. And if we can limit more warming in the future decades and have a less horrific future by continuing to rapidly cut these greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible. And without these drastic cuts, scientists say that a nearly unimaginable future is possible by 2100, when today's kids are in old age. And that would prompt the greatest uptick in disruptive mass migration and routine deadly extreme weather. So we really have to do something about this now, because our global surface temperatures are going to continue to increase. And this is from a New Hampshire report that was published in 2014. And this talks about the number of days over 90 degrees in New Hampshire per year. And I'll break this graph down for you. So the gray is the historical. So in the 30-year period between 1980 to 2009, we had about 7 or 8 days above 90 degrees. Projecting forward, the blue bars are a lower emission scenario. So if we're doing something to decrease our carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The red is a higher emission scenario, and we are in the red. So we haven't done enough to decrease our carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions. So you can just pay attention to the red bars. So in this 30-year period, from 2010 to 2039, we're expecting to see about 12 days over 90 degrees. So this is where we are now. But remember, I just said in a previous slide that Manchester has already had 30 days over 90 degrees last year. And the data isn't compiled for the summer yet, so I can't tell you what it was like this year. And going out into the future, we could see the whole summer above 90 degrees. So this projection was very, very conservative in 2014, because we thought we'd only be here in our 2014 is when the report was put together. But in 2014, we thought we'd only be here with these high heat days, but we're already here. And so that shows you that rapid increase, that it's faster than was projected. And this report, this climate change in New Hampshire report, is going to be updated, right? It's going to be published in November. I'm working with the UNH scientists right now to have a new updated climate assessment for New Hampshire. So we can get that to you if you want to see more updated data in a future time. So we're going to see an increase in hot days here in New Hampshire as well. So when we look about future climate situations, there's going to be many changes in the system that become larger in direct relation to increased global warming. So the more we put CO2 into the atmosphere, the more we're going to have warming, and we're going to have these extreme weather events. And our infrastructure is going to need to become more resilient, because our infrastructure has to deal with these greater swings in wet and dry conditions, right? In June, we were in drought. In July, it rained the whole month. So if you're a drinking water facility or a wastewater treatment facility, you have to have backups and redundancies to handle these greater swings in wet and dry conditions. And this inconsistent rain that we're seeing in our summers is really hard on farmers, plants, and animals, and those of us who have wells. Many wells dried up this year. So this is something of a concern for our state. And warming weather also means less ice cover for lakes and rivers, which affects the ecology of those systems. And then it impacts the freeze-thaw cycle. So those of us who live on dirt roads, we're seeing that our dirt roads are all mush many times in the winter instead of just the one big mush during mud season in the spring. And our state has seen 3 of its most severe multi-year droughts in the past 20 years. And this is a drought map that was put together on August 19th. And this shows our state, and the southern part of the state has recovered from the drought. But in this section of the state, we're still abnormally dry. In Coos County, we have moderate drought. And on the eastern edge of Coos County, they're still in severe drought. This has lessened up a little bit since this was produced. But I wanted to show you this because this also shows all the water restrictions in our community. Some were mandatory and some were voluntary. So the drought has impacted a lot of parts of our state, including people who have wells, but our agriculture and all of our infrastructure trying to manage for both flooding and drought. And if you're a gardener, it's been a tough year to have a garden with a dry in June and a pouring in July. And in terms of our future precipitation, so not only are we going to see periods of drought, but our annual precipitation is projected to increase from 17 to 20% by the end of the century, and in both emission scenarios. So just like heat, we've already committed to a certain amount of increase in precipitation, and it's going to increase the amount and intensity. So it's not just like that gentle summer rain. It's going to be these intense storms where you're getting 3 inches at a time. And you know what this increase in extreme precipitation does. It results in runoff, damage to critical infrastructure, erosion, and a decrease in our water quality. So looking again to the future, continued global warming is projected to further intensify the global water cycle. So we're going to see these periods of wet and dry. So in general, New Hampshire is going to get wetter, but we're going to see that wet happening in fall, winter, and spring, where we're going to have periods of dry in the summer. And under these scenarios with increasing CO2 emissions, remember how I told you the ocean and the land was being a carbon sink? They were taking up the CO2. Well, as we continue to see more CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, the ocean and land aren't going to be able to take in as much. And so they're going to slow down their ability to suck the CO2 out of the atmosphere. So that's going to have more CO2 in the atmosphere, which is going to continue to fuel these intense weather events. And many of the changes that we're seeing right now are irreversible for centuries to millennia, especially changes in our ocean, our ice sheets, and our global sea levels. So in New Hampshire, this is the New Hampshire sea level rise projections. Now, this is a busy graph, but I'll take you through it. So what we're going to look at is 3, 4, and 5. These are the central estimate of sea level rise, the lower end, and the upper end. And so they're plotted right here. And so what we can see here is this section of the graph shows you the observed changes in sea level from tidal gauges at Portland, Maine, and Seavey Island. And then you can see where we start to see a little sea level rise starting to happen in New Hampshire. And by 2050, if we assume that the global greenhouse gas emissions begin declining by mid-century, we're likely to only see 0.5 to 1.3 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and 1 to say 3 feet by 2100. But that assumes that the global greenhouse gas emissions begin declining by mid-century. If they don't, we could see much more changes, right? This is all probabilities. So this is a 1 in 20 chance estimate. Number 6, number 7 is 1 in 100. The 1 in 1,000 chance, we could be seeing sea level rises about, let's see, 3 feet right there in 2050. So that's just a couple years. And the rise will be much higher if these greenhouse gases continue increasing, or if there's a huge amount of ice sheet melt and it continues to accelerate, because ice sheet melt puts more water into the ocean and causes sea level to rise. What we do know for sure is that sea levels are going to continue to rise for centuries. And because our coast is significantly impacted by nor'easters, they drive ocean water onto the land, and it causes storm surge and flooding of our communities in coastal New Hampshire. And as sea level rises, groundwater rises. So look at this image. This is the saltwater freshwater interface. And as the ocean is moving up from sea level rise, it's pushing that groundwater up towards the surface, and it can impact our freshwater wetlands and our infrastructure. And we are going to see groundwater rise farther inland than sea level rise. And we can expect from 1 to 5 feet of groundwater rise as far as 3 miles inland from tidal shorelines. And we didn't really know about this. This was published in 2017, and we were shocked because it's underground. Like, you don't think about this. And the amount of groundwater rise isn't uniform or linear with distance from the coast. It depends on a lot of things like your local hydrogeology, if you have streams or wetlands near you, your distance from the coast, and if you're doing a lot of groundwater pumping. We have communities in Newmarket that were doing a lot of groundwater pumping, and they sucked the salt water right up into their drinking water system, and they had to get a new drinking water system because they contaminated their drinking water well. So this is something we're experiencing already in New Hampshire. And this continued groundwater rise is going to impact roads, underground storage tanks, drinking water wells, septic systems. So it's something we really got to keep our eye on. And it's hard to because it's underground. So when we think forward, and if we think about assessing our risk and trying to adapt, every region is projected to experience concurrent and multiple changes in climatic impacts. And that's what's going on in the Pacific Northwest. They've had this long-term drought, so they have very, very dry areas. Then they had this incredible heat wave in June, over 100 degrees in many states that don't have any air conditioning, coupled with the amount of wildfires that are occurring in the Pacific Northwest. So these concurrent and multiple changes are going to be experienced in every region. And luckily we haven't had much, well, as much as the Pacific Northwest, but this is something that we have to keep our eye on. And we have to also pay attention to these low likelihood outcomes, such as ice sheet collapse or abrupt ocean circulation changes. And some of these compound extreme events and warming will be substantially larger, and we have to be prepared for that. Although it might be on the lower probability, it's something we need to think about as we start to move forward. And to limit our climate change in the future, we have to limit our CO2 emissions. And the scientists say we have to reach at least net zero by 2050. So we need to start reducing emissions now to get us to have no emissions by 2050. So here's a summary. Every single ton of carbon emissions counts. There is a near linear relationship between added emissions and added heat. More warming means more extreme weather, and the hotter it gets, the less carbon will be able to be absorbed by oceans and the land. So it's going to put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is going to cause more warming. They call that a positive feedback loop. I don't like to use that term because I usually think of positive as good things, and it's not a good thing. So critics of climate action have argued that our role, New Hampshire's role in emissions, is too small to merit any changing of our behavior. It doesn't matter. It's all on China. And that's not true. The United States is one of the top emitters in the world. And New Hampshire is part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a regionalized energy system. So changes we make here have ripple effects beyond state lines. It would help our local economies, and it would help our public health. So we should be paying attention to this. And New Hampshire is not leading on this issue. The report also suggests that every person, especially governments and businesses, can contribute measurably to avert the worst possible climate outcome for the planet. So it's up to us to do this, and we have to do it now. And the report also makes it clear how starkly different the current climate is already from that in which modern human civilization first thrived. So we're already living in a different climate. So if you tell your kids that, you know, oh, when I was a kid, I got so much snow and I had to walk to school, you're not lying. It was true. It was different when we were younger. So here's the summary points. It's real. It's us. Scientists agree, and we need to act now. It's urgent. But we have the power to influence our future. We can make choices about how we power our homes, how we power our municipal buildings, and how we drive. We can make choices, and we can do this to help the future of our planet and the kids who are young today. So with that, I just want to pause for a second to see if anybody has any questions about the climate. And if not, I will go into the projects that are going on in the region, but that was a ton of information. So I don't want you to feel like I got a fire hose out at you. I want to take a minute and see if you have any questions about what I was just speaking about.
Yeah, Sherry, there are 2 questions in the chat. Eric, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi. So I put it in the chat so I wouldn't have to remember it later. Okay, so where in New Hampshire is no longer usable with a 0.5 to 1.3 foot sea level rise?
Oh, so Hampton floods today weekly. So people can't park their car on the streets in Hampton weekly, and it's projected to increase. So for me to tell you exactly what won't be usable, I can't do this in this presentation because I would have to pull up some maps. But there are a lot of areas in New Hampshire that will be underwater every day. And so that affects, like, if you're going to continue that road to that residence, if you're, so I can't tell you exactly, but you know what you could do is you could go on the New Hampshire flood risk guidance. Just Google New Hampshire flood risk guidance 2019, and you will get a report that has the science with some mapping, and it can show you exactly what areas are going to be inundated. The interesting thing for Hampton and Seabrook and Rye, a lot of the flooding that they're experiencing is coming from the marsh side, not necessarily from the Atlantic side. So the marsh just kind of oozes up into people's backyards. And there's some excellent photography in that report that I just suggested that you look at that has drone images of how the coast, the water just comes up to the coast and puts these communities like islands. So it is pretty significant by 2050.
And then Rebecca had a question, I think is very similar. It plays off of Eric's, right? You wanted to know the maps. Is there one for Portsmouth, but not the whole seacoast?
Yeah, it sounded like you were referencing those, Sherry. I was just curious what maps were available.
Yeah, so in my next couple of slides, I'm going to tell you that every community in coastal New Hampshire has had the ones that touch saltwater. So the communities around Great Bay and around the Atlantic coast have had a vulnerability assessment done. So every community has a set of maps that they can look at and see where sea level rise is projected in different years and where sea level and storm surge. Because now we're getting these storms on higher sea level. So the storms are bringing more water farther inland. So those are available. And what I can do is send Amanda some references that she can share with you. And there's something called the Coastal Viewer, the New Hampshire Coastal Viewer, and that's on Granite, which is associated with UNH. And you can plug in different scenarios, the interactive viewer. So you can plug in different scenarios and see how it changes. So we have static maps, but we also have interactive maps. Okay, any other questions?
None in the chat.
Okay, thanks for paying attention to the chat. I can't do that while I'm presenting.
No worries.
And we can have more time. I only have 2 more slides, and this is going to just go through what folks are doing in New Hampshire to prepare. Oh, this is my Yahoo slide to say we got to do this together. All of us have to do this together. We have to have shared voices. We have to let our decision makers know that we want to see action on this topic. So there's that. I forgot about that one. All right, so now let's talk about some projects in our region. So the first thing is what I just mentioned, is that all the communities on the Atlantic coast and Great Bay have had vulnerability assessments done. Some of the communities are in the Stratford Region Planning Commission area, and some are in the Rockingham Planning Commission area. So all of those communities have these vulnerability assessments. I just listed the ones around Great Bay, but all of the coastal communities as well. And in your own town, there was a Lamprey River study done that included Lee, and that study was done in 2012. And what the scientists did is they modeled the increases in precipitation and their associated flooding and how it would impact the floodplains. And Lee wanted to use this to revise the floodplain regulations, but because Lee doesn't just have the Lamprey River in town, you also have the Oyster River, the North River, and the Little River. We hadn't done that assessment for those. So that assessment, same assessment that was done in 2012 on the Lamprey, was done for the other rivers in your community in 2018. And there's an interest by your decision makers to revise the floodplain regulations to include this updated information to keep people out of harm's way. Because if the flooding is going to be different, let's revise the floodplain regulations and keep people out of harm's way. So that's your town. Durham has been a leader in climate action for a number of years. They're developing a climate adaptation chapter in their master plan. They're using that coastal flood risk summary that I just mentioned to Eric to inform their projects. So they're looking at those maps and saying, what should we be doing? They're doing a project right now that I'm involved in, modeling groundwater rise to assess the impacts of groundwater to their assets. So their streets, their septic systems, wells, et cetera. They're also doing work on the mitigation front. Durham has joined the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, and they're developing some emissions targets for the town. They've done a greenhouse gas inventory to understand how much greenhouse gases they emit. They've updated their flood hazard overlay district to include recommending higher standards for any building that's going to be in areas that are projected to be increased by sea level rise. We did a climate in the classroom program with them in their schools. And I don't know if you've been out to Wagon Hill Farm recently, but Wagon Hill Farm was experiencing a lot of shoreline erosion. And so we worked with a number of different funders, and it's been an ongoing project to restore the shoreline with a living shoreline. So we literally went out and planted grasses there so that it would be a living shoreline. So not a wall or something like that, because these living shorelines are better for the environment, and they help to allow the shoreline to migrate as sea level rise comes up, as opposed to a hardened structure. So Durham's been very, very proactive. And Dover, another proactive community, is involved in a project right now looking at how social equity and climate impacts intersect. And that's a project that's going on right now. They're also working to incorporate climate impacts into their capital improvement planning decisions. They're also planning an all boards forum so that they get all the board members together with the city staff to learn about climate related data and resources. And they're the first community in the state to hire a resilience coordinator as a staff person. In the past, they adopted a climate adaptation master plan chapter. They've developed an urban tree plan to help deal with urban heat island effects. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but if you live in a densely developed city and it's hot all day, all day, all day, your pavement and your roads and everything is absorbing that heat. And then when night comes, that heat is being radiated back out, so people can't cool down. So if you have a good tree plan, you have more trees in the community, they can provide shade, they can also absorb some of the heat and reduce that heat island effect. So Dover has just done that. They just put that together last year. They did a great project. They had a sea level rise youth art contest, and you can see the image there. That was the winner. And that's a mural at the Dover Children's Museum now. And that young woman depicted what Dover might look like with, pretty high sea level rises. And then they've done some role playing with stakeholder engagement. And they also did a greenhouse gas inventory. So those are some of the big projects, but other communities like New Durham and Somersworth have had their staff and board members participate in a Path to Resilience project that we're doing in that area. We're taking lessons learned from the coastal communities and how they moved climate forward, and we're transferring that knowledge into upper watershed communities so that they can understand how it's been done in the coast and how they can start to address their concerns like heat and freshwater flooding, et cetera. UNH just released their 2021 Wildcat Climate Action Plan. The Barrington Conservation Commission has incorporated climate into its conservation priorities and their natural resources assessment. And Madbury held a public workshop to talk about climate impacts and extreme weather preparedness. So the coastal New Hampshire is really, the coastal watershed is doing a great job with this kind of stuff. And I work statewide. And because the coast is vulnerable and because the coast has so many impacts, and the coast is also eligible for National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration funding, we're able to move some of these projects forward in our communities. So if Lee is interested in doing more around this issue, we can work with you. And when I say we, I'm part of a group called the Coastal Adaptation Work Group, and Amanda's on our mailing list. And we host, it's changed with the pandemic, of course, but we used to host a lot of workshops and provide updates on science and things. So if you're interested in moving things forward in Lee, I'm happy to, provide some assistance or connect you to people who can better assist you and see if there's, some way we can help you with some education or projects in your community. So that is the end of my prepared comments, and I can stop sharing my screen and we can talk.
So first of all, thank you.
Sure.
A lot of gloom and doom, but there's some positives at the end. That was good.
I always end my climate presentations with positives because if, you know, a lot of people say, well, just scare them to death. And it's like, well, that doesn't, when you're scared, you don't act, you freeze. And we have to act, and we have to act now. And so, yes, there is potential to save us, you know, but we have to do it now. And I think, you know, New Hampshire isn't a leader on this topic as a state. Our communities are leaders on this topic. And so that's where we are working so that we can bring communities forward and help them understand the risks as well as what we can do to move forward.
I'll be selfish and ask a question. You mentioned New Durham, and I only know the politics of New Durham, but I'm surprised that they participated in anything in regards to this particular topic. How did that conversation happen? Like, did they approach you? Did you approach them? Just curious, like, how did that conversation happen? And how,
Sure.
I guess, how are they accepting the information and do they have a path forward?
They don't have a path forward yet. We reached out to them. Again, the project that we're involved in is we're trying to take the lessons learned from our coastal and Great Bay communities and transfer them into the upper watershed. So we're working with Barrington, New Durham, Kingston, Rochester, and Somersworth. And so we started out by asking them if they would participate. And then we had a series of questions. And then we asked them if they wanted a climate change presentation, or they wanted to start down this path. And there's a gentleman in New Durham who used to work at UNH, Bob Craycraft. And Bob Craycraft is an environmental person. And so he was willing to meet, and I didn't do the one-on-one interview, some of my colleagues did. So he was willing to meet with us and have that conversation. But I do think from that, there was not a lot of interest in having a bunch of climate champions come marching into New Durham and have this presentation. So, you know, that's a challenge, right? Because you don't want to only work with Dover and Durham, but you want to work with communities who are willing and who are interested in learning this information. So we really want to spread ourselves out, and I work statewide. So I work with other communities in the state. So when this new climate assessment comes out, it's going to be published in November, likely end of November, probably. I will be doing outreach around the state on the new climate information so that people understand that, and these are downscaled projections specifically to New Hampshire. I talked to you a lot about global impacts today and then try to scale it to New Hampshire, but this climate assessment will be specific to New Hampshire.
Very good.
Yeah, sure.
Can I just say that in Liam on the select board, and I would be really excited to talk to you about anything. And I've been asking so many questions about flooding and our waters, and, you know, I keep kind of being met with, we're fine and we're doing it and don't worry about it and stop asking so many questions. So any information I can get, I would love. And this presentation's been really helpful. So just so you know, friend over here.
Sure, thanks for being my friend. So when that floodplain piece, expanding the plane comes up on a warrant article, you guys can help get the public behind it, because that would be a first step for Lee, and talk about it in a sense that we're trying to keep people out of harm's way, people and infrastructure out of harm's way. And the EPA and the Natural Hazard Mitigation Council has a figure that for every $1 we invest now upfront proactively saves us $7 in recovery. And so even if we get hit with a big storm, and even if it's a disaster declaration, and even if we get FEMA funding to recover, that takes a long time. First of all, FEMA is very slow at response. We also have to pay a 25% match. And there are no state funds to help you with that match. That is going to be out of your municipality's coffers. So, the economics of this really play out well. And you don't have to be an economist. I'm not an economist, but you can say that it's safer and less expensive to be proactive now. And these changes are only going to get worse. And usually I don't always do presentations about the IPCC report. That's what Amanda asked. So that's what I did today. Usually my presentations are very New Hampshire centric, and the title is Making the Connections. So helping people to understand that what we're seeing out here this summer, drought, June, worry about wells drying up, July, pouring rain. Those are all indicators of a changing climate. And if we can start to help people in our communities recognize that these extreme weather events are indicators of a changing climate, we're going to start to help people understand that what's around us. And if there's a strong climate denier in your community, chances are you're not going to change that person's mind, whether it's with data, stories, they through a political lens. And they can't, people always usually ask me, how do you get to climate deniers? And I say, I don't.
Yeah.
What I used to say was, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. But now that's all gone, there's all,
Right.
so I can't say that anymore, because they are entitled to their own facts. They have their own facts all the time. So it's a conversation to have, and start with, sharing, like, have you noticed the weather's kind of weird? Like, how'd your garden do? How'd your well do? And you can start with a common understanding that you both agree with, and say, I just heard a presentation the other night, and these are signs of a changing climate, and it's going to get worse. Maybe don't dive in that quick, but.
Sherry?
Sure.
Sherry, has anyone started analyzing how the possible slowdown and changes in ocean current might affect New Hampshire and New England?
Yeah. Yep. And I mentioned that a little bit in the IPCC report summary, that if we see a slowdown, well, we are seeing a slowdown in the Gulf Stream, and that's why our oceans are so warm. All right. So did you go swimming this summer in the ocean? Did you stay in longer than you ever did before? It's because our oceans are warmer. And what happens is it's called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning. You don't need to know that. It's the Gulf Stream. And so from our southern latitudes, warm surface water comes up into our region where it's usually cooled, and cold salt water is more dense than warm salt water. So as the water's cooled, it gets dense and it drops down and forms a deep ocean current that takes that water back down to our lower latitudes, and it's like a conveyor belt. So what's happening is, because the Arctic is melting so much and the Greenland ice sheet is melting so much, they are contributing cold, fresh water into the system. And so when those warm surface waters get up there, they're getting cold, but they're not salty. They're diluted, so they're not dropping down. So that whole conveyor belt is stalling, and that warm water is in the Gulf of Maine or right off the coast of New Hampshire. So that's why our ocean waters are warmer, and that's had huge impacts on the fishing industry. The cod have already moved north. Southern New England doesn't really have a lobster population anymore. That we still do, but like Long Island, Connecticut, theirs isn't very good anymore. And our shrimp population crashed in 2013, and it hasn't come back. We don't have Gulf of Maine shrimp anymore. So that warming is causing huge ecological disturbances in the waters off New Hampshire. So in the report, and if you dig into it, Mary, you'll see they don't predict that current will stop in this century, but they're keeping an eye on it. And right now it's the slowest it's been in 1,000 years. So it's something that we really have to keep an eye on, because the oceans govern so much about our atmosphere and everything. So good question, Mary. Thank you for that.
Yes, Sue, thanks for raising your
Yes.
hand, but go ahead.
So in, I think it was 2005 and 2006, we had 200-year floods, one after the other. I live on the Lamprey River, and the water came halfway through my woods. It completely submerged a bench with a back that I had moved probably about, I don't know, 20 feet and attached to a tree. Otherwise, it probably would have floated away. But it still didn't come too close to my house. It was still in the woods. And I'm just wondering, how much worse would the next 100-year flood be? And how far away would it be? Because that was two of them, one after the other. I don't know. I'm just wondering. you know?
Well, we don't know. We don't know when, and those are called a 1% annual chance. So it doesn't mean that it's going to be 100 years before it'll happen again. And you may remember in the sea level rise slide, I showed you the different probabilities, and that's a 1 in 100 chance that we're going to have that kind of storm again. So it just depends on the atmospheric conditions. And we had the 2 boom, boom, and that started all of us going, holy cow, something's changing. And we have been very lucky in New Hampshire because Hurricane Sandy went to the south, Tropical Storm Irene went to the north. We are way overdue for something big. And that is something that we have to pay attention to. And so when there are forecasts for extreme events, a hurricane or something, get ready. Because I was on a National Weather Service webinar the other day, and they talked about warning versus watch. And a watch is like and they did this analogy, like they showed, so a watch is like, they made the analogy to tacos. Okay. So you got corn chips, you got some kind of meat or vegetable, you got some cheese, you got some salsa. So that is a watch. You have the potential to make a taco, but when you have a warning, they show you the taco. So that, and they do this wide warning so that people can get prepared, and then it could change, because the meteorology is harder to forecast now because the climate is different. So, and everybody says, oh, those stupid idiots, they never can predict a storm on time. Well, they're not stupid idiots. They're really smart. It's hard to predict a storm. So that's why when you have these watches, you need to pay attention and get prepared, tie that bench up. And if you don't have to have your bench float away, good, you're all right. And, I have friends in Florida who are like, oh, that was nothing. And it's like, don't be that dismissive, because they are trying to protect you. That's why they're doing these warnings. So I can't answer directly when we're going to have another 100-year storm or a 1 in 100% chance, but a 1% chance. But I can say it's likely to happen again, and we have to be prepared.
Okay.
Those were big wake-up calls for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm glad your house was okay.
Oh, yeah. It was just the roads were submerged.
Oh, yeah.
It was very hard to get out.
Oh, yeah. Really hard.
I think the bridge over the 152 bridge where the lamprey goes, I've never seen it like that. And I mean, to get to the bridge, to just look at it, I was wading through, I don't know, it was almost deep enough that I thought maybe I shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But
and in the
did.
future, trust your inner voice. Don't do that. Deb, did you have a question?
I did. I remember on one of your slides, you talked about Barrington's Conservation Commission and what they were doing. So I'm on the Conservation Commission in Lee, and I'd be really interested to know what they're doing so that we can do something.
Sure. Do you know people in Barrington on the commission?
Oh, we do? Okay. Amanda says we do. Good.
Yeah, sure. Talk to them. And really importantly, ask, how did you get started? That helps to understand how they move this change through their commission.
Okay, great. Amanda.
Yeah, and Amanda, you and I will be in touch. I mean, you can ask me questions from here to eternity so that we can help you folks.
Yeah, Deb, I talk every once in a while to the Barrington Conservation Commission wearing my legislative hat.
Oh, there you go.
So I know the group pretty well. So I'm happy to do any email intros if you want.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
No problem. Any other questions? Eric.
Hi. So I've been sitting here thinking a little bit more about, so you were talking about increased precipitation, but of course, precipitation is more than just rain, right? It's also snow. And I know you were saying before you weren't an economist, but I'm going to kind of go down that route a little bit. More snow, right? You've got to, if it's happening more often, you've got to pay your crews more, right? You've got more salt and sand you got to put down. You got to pay for that. Eventually, you get to a point where you start running out of places to put the snow. I'm wondering if there's more to it than I'm just thinking about than just these, economic matters. Your snowplow budget has got to go up, but what are some of the other detrimental environmental effects of having more snow?
Well, we're going to see an increase in precipitation while we're seeing an increase in temperatures. And so there may be periods of more snow, but we also may see periods of more rain on snow, so that the temperatures aren't warm enough to give you volumes of the temperatures are too warm to give you volumes of snow. Think about last year, and I don't know if anybody's a cross-country skier, but we could complain together about last year. We see snow now, and it'll come down. We'll get, I'll be out, I'll be waxing my skis, I'll be ready to go, and then it turns to rain. And our atmosphere is more moist because it's warmer, and warmer air holds more moisture. So what we're seeing in snow, especially in our region here, and I live in Deerfield, so I'm right where you guys are, we're seeing these snows come, but then they finish with rain or they finish with ice. And so that's a problem too, because you're plowing, right? You got to clean the roads. Everything you said, Eric, is right. Where are you going to put it, all this stuff, but then it finishes with rain and ice. And so now you got to go out again because we're going to have slippery conditions. And so, yes, it is a problem. And when I talk to people and, like municipal folks, you have to plan for flooding and drought. You have to plan for snow and ice, and I live on a dirt road. And so, like I mentioned, the freeze thaw cycle, our road has to be maintained all the time. It melted. I counted last year, it melted 7 times. We usually have one mud season. We had 7, and and they got to grate the road and everything again, but they can't do it if it's too wet. So, and I know people who couldn't get fuel deliveries because the fuel trucks wouldn't come down the road or their driveway. So there's a ton of economic impacts. And I wish it was just more snow, honestly, because I love winter, but our winters are definitely different. And like I said, if you're a cross-country skier, I couldn't get my skis to work because it would just build up on the bottom of my skis. So I drove north, and what did I do? I put more CO2 into the atmosphere because it was my birthday and I wanted to ski. So it's a catch-22, but it's harder for communities to plan for both, and it is expensive. So yes, you're right, Eric. And I want to just bring up the whole polar vortex thing, because sometimes when we're in the middle of winter and it's really cold and we're getting a ton of snow, people say, where's global warming? And they think it's all over. But when we have those periods of really cold for a long time, that's the jet stream changing and locking us into those cold patterns for a long period of time, just like that image of the Omega block that I showed from the summer where it was really hot in the Pacific Northwest for a long, long time. We'll get those periods of really cold, snowy times like we had it last January where it was really cold. And that's because the jet stream is dipping down and locking into place and giving us cold weather while it's pushing warm air into Alaska and other places. And I have images for those that I didn't put in this presentation, but so if you're in the middle of winter and people are like, what happened to global warming? This is a sign of global warming, this locked in jet stream that gets stuck like that.
And Sherry, just add one thing, our roof guy last week, and he's also worried about the load factor on buildings with more ice.
Yep. I've been shoveling off my roof on my shed because it's just so dense, with the snow and then the rain, and it gets really heavy. And yes, there's been a lot of buildings that have collapsed like large industrial buildings from the snow load, because we're designed to handle snow, but we're not designed to handle heavy, wet snow. And so that's a huge change. Yep.
All right. Anyone else have a question, thought, comment? Sue. You're muted.
So what can we do as individuals? Buy an electric car?
The best thing you could do is insulate your home, or buy drapes or things to shore up your house. Because if your house is well insulated, or I have a 9-foot slider in my living room that faces south, so I get a ton of sun, which is great. I want that in the winter, but I don't want it in the summer. So I bought drapes and I put drapes on that window, and I use them in the winter to keep the warmth in, but I use them more in the summer to keep the heat out. So think of ways to make your home very, very efficient. So that's number
Okay.
you can do. Number 2 is keep voting, right? Because that's important. Number 3, you could get a fuel efficient vehicle. You could get a hybrid vehicle. You could get an electric car. Those are all good options. If you can't afford any of them, keep your car tuned. Keep your tires inflated. Be sure that your air filters and things are clean, because even if you have a regular fuel burning car, if it's efficient, it's going to burn less gas. You're going to save more, you're going to put less CO2 into the atmosphere. And then talk about this with your friends and family. Help people to become more efficient. You know, the picture of the garage with the solar panels, that's my house. I have solar panels on my house. They're very affordable. You know, you can do it. Like, you just have to think creatively about ways you can make a difference and make a difference in your community. One of the other images was a municipal building in Durham. They have solar panels on that. And so try to get your community to do these things. Try to, you know, there's programs where a whole community will do a solarized project, and they'll, you know, work with a vendor. And if people want to get solar in their community, that vendor will give them a little discounted price. In Deerfield, we did a group energy audit. So we worked with a vendor to give all of us who were interested in getting an energy audit on our homes. And so this company came in, I think it cost me $300, and you come out with a list of all these things that you could do in your home to be more efficient. And I only used 19 gallons of propane last year because we were home. It was the pandemic. So we had our wood stoves going. I used to burn like 500. So it's really amazing. You know, and I work for the state. I don't make a lot of money. And I've done a ton of retrofitting to my home. I've got solar panels, you know, and it's affordable. You can do it. And so I feel good. I feel good about what I'm doing. And plus I try to educate people all the time, but you know, you have to do what feels good. And if my email is up there, if you have any questions, you know, feel free to be in touch with me. I'm happy to help you. And, you know, if you could get things going in your community, there's more bang for your buck, right? So those are all ways.
So Lou Grondin is doing a solar and electric vehicle meet and greet on Saturday. Did you all know that? Good. So Saturday from 10 till noon at Little River Park.
Perfect.
So that should be good. He's worried that no one's going to show up. So if we all show up, that would be great.
And if I could just throw in something at a different level, because it's often, the point is often made these days that we can all keep doing our little things, but unless we stop the fossil fuel pipeline, unless we stop funding that, we're not really going to get anywhere. So companies like Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Chubb Insurance, and boycott the companies that are the funders of the pipeline.
Thank you for that, Mary.
And any company that belongs to the American Legislative Exchange, is a committee or commission? I can't remember. Because they're writing the laws at the state level that are undoing everything that we're trying to accomplish.
Also, the oil companies are still getting breaks from the federal government that they don't need. And it should be the green energy providers that are getting those.
Yes.
And I used to work for Carol Shea Porter when she was our congresswoman, and I know that we always, as Democrats, kept trying to get rid of those little perks the oil companies had that they don't need anymore. And we never could manage to get rid of them. So it's just really hard politically, but it really is necessary because, you know, they got in there a century ago, as my understanding is, when oil itself needed the boost. And they don't need any boost anymore. They make lots of money. They don't need our tax money. But I don't know. We need a bigger majority.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't give up. Don't give.
yeah.
I'd say we also need to do the same in New Hampshire. If you all knew all the bills that have been
Yeah.
vetoed that are environmental, it's heartbreaking.
Well, the current Republicans in New Hampshire are just over the top. They remind me of, what was it, 2010 and 11?
With O'Brien?
Yeah, under
Yeah.
O'Brien, right? Only worse.
Yes.
Yeah, worse.
Well, on that note, I just want to thank you, Amanda, for doing what you do, because I admire your tenacity and I really appreciate knowing you're in the legislature for us. So thank you.
Thank you. You do more than I do. I love DES and I talk, that was my goal when I was chair. That was my goal moving into the next year, was being like, we need to get DES money. And of course, then we became in the minority and I'm like, well, there's going, my idea is going to go out the window, but I want to keep trying because you all need more staff and you need help. So I'm all over it. I
Thank you.
appreciate what you do. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, I just want to put a little shout out for next month. Sherry, feel free to jump off. It's only going to be a couple minutes, but our October monthly meeting, I sent an email out. I'll send another one out. Obviously, we're going to have Sheriff Mark Brave. He's got some cool new things happening on the county level. He also is doing this new drone thing. He's got a lot of stuff going on. So he will be chatting with us with our own chief, Tom Dronesmith, Dronesfield. So I'm actually really excited about it because we've never had him before. So with the Lee Dems, and he was more than happy to chat with us. And then in November, as we've already kind of talked about, although Jeff just jumped off, but our November meeting will be about redistricting. Our guest speakers will be Ken Gallagher, who is the principal planner with the Office of Planning and Development, which is within the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs. And then we'll also have Representative Margie Smith, who is on the House redistricting committee. And she's from Durham, if you don't know her already. She's been in the House for probably ever. She's very knowledgeable and a great resource. And then in December, we usually do a holiday party. We didn't last year, obviously. I sent out a link back in the beginning of September. If you all could fill out the 2-question Google form to let me know if you want to meet in person, if you want to have a holiday party or have another day off or have, another month off, or maybe we have another guest speaker, please let me know so I can finish off the year strong with our planning. I appreciate that. And then with that, that's all I got. Does anyone else have anything else to share or comment or? Nope. Then you all have a wonderful evening and a great month, and I will be in touch via email shortly.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thanks, everyone.